I hear what everybody's saying.
Everybody thinks you just talk all the time, and they don't realize that you're listening to everything.
Oh, I'm listening. Hell yeah.
He's rolling tape.
Just for the good stuff.
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio.
Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio, a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode 58, brought to you by Cook's Holsters, American-made custom Kydex holsters with a lifetime warranty and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. CooksHolsters.com. Welcome to this week's excursion into faith, firearms, and freedom. Hope you had a great week. It was, for the most part, beautiful here in North Texas, but unfortunately, I couldn't take advantage of it. I mentioned last week I took a competition handgun class from Mike Seeklander up in Oklahoma last weekend, and during that class, I had an excruciating flare-up in my left thumb, some sort of a pain in the support hand thumb. It was particularly painful during drills where we were working on gripping the gun as hard as possible to control recoil. It got to the point where my hand would actually tremble. Sergeant Bill said it sounded to him like tendinitis. My doctor later in the week confirmed it, and she suggested, hey, you just need to give it some rest. You need to take 4 weeks off. To which I replied, I've got a match in Louisiana in less than 3 weeks. Yeah. So she was like, oh, okay, so you probably also need to practice before that too, right? And I said, yeah, like every other day, probably, at the very least. So she came up with an alternate plan, which was basically to put me on a 6-day run of steroids for the inflammation. But I'm taking time off from practice during that just to sort of let things calm down a little bit. It sucks because the weather's been great, and I felt like I was really starting to make some progress in dry fire practice, but oh well, hopefully I can get back to dry fire by midweek next week, and hopefully shoot a local match next weekend before Team Armed Lutheran heads to Louisiana for the Battle on the Bayou on March 4th. I celebrated my 48th birthday on, it would have been yesterday, February 18th. And what else is going on? Oh, my 24th wedding anniversary is this week on the 23rd. Happy anniversary to my wonderful wife, Mrs. Armed Lutheran. You can hear my interview with her as we talk about women and guns and buying your first gun back in episode 53. Be sure to check out the Reformation Gun Club. It's a new membership site for fans of the podcast. It's just $15.17. See what I did there? 1517, 500th anniversary of the Reformation. So for $15.17 a year, you get some cool Armed Lutheran swag. You get special member discounts from our sponsors and access to members-only audio content. We'll be adding more and more content every month, so go check it out at armedlutheran.us and click on the Reformation Gun Club link at the top in the menu. And speaking of sponsors, please visit and support the sponsors who make Armed Lutheran Radio possible. We've got a great group of awesome sponsors. They're all great people. They offer excellent products and services for their customers, and many of them offer special pricing just for you for listening to the show. Our newest sponsor is Galloway Precision from my home state of North Carolina. Eric Galloway and his wife manufacture and sell aftermarket upgrade kits for popular carry pistols like Ruger, Kel-Tec, Smith & Wesson, SIG, Glock, Springfield, and more. RAE Gear USA manufactures tactical sheaths for multi-tools and pistol magazines. Guns for Gals is a specialty firearms boutique right here in North Texas in McKinney. They're designed to empower women by helping them find self-defense tools that fit their needs. Lee Armory has been making AK pattern rifles since 2012. They take quality European parts kits and combine them with American-made receivers and barrels, and then they enhance the combination to make them even better, to make a really quality AK. They take it all to a whole new level, and they back it up with great customer service. U.S. Reloading Supply is a family-owned reloading supply business in Florida specializing in the needs of high-volume reloaders who compete and hunt. They carry the top name brands. They'll match their competitors' prices, including shipping. Check them out. And, of course, our main sponsor, Cook's Holsters. Quality, custom Kydex holsters. I trust them with my life. I've been using them personally for everyday carry and competition for years. Please consider supporting these people. They're great people, and they make this show possible. So check them out. Their banners are on the website. Links are in the show notes, and you'll hear their ads on the show today. Please show them some support and make sure they know that you appreciate their support of the show. All right, what have we got going on episode 58 today? Sergeant Bill has tips for choosing dummy rounds, the little plastic ammunition, dummy ammunition that you use in dry fire. There's different kinds, and each different kind has its advantages and disadvantages for use in dry fire, and Sergeant Bill will talk about the pros and cons of each different kind today. Aaron Israel's talking about how to establish rally points as part of your family defense plan. Mia's tip today is about vehicle preparedness, expanding on Aaron's tip from episode 57, and Pastor Bennett and I will be looking at an article by a pacifist Quaker, I guess that's kind of redundant, who suggests that Jesus' command that his disciples buy swords in Luke 22 was so that he could fulfill prophecy by being numbered with the lawless, because the lawless carry swords. All of that's coming your way right after this, right here on Armed Lutheran Radio. As many of you know, Sergeant Bill and I are competitive shooters. We're also reloaders. Bill helped me to get started last year, but I've still got a lot to learn. One thing I do know, though, you need a good source for supplies and components. So let me tell you about U.S. Reloading Supply. Yeah, there are bigger suppliers out there, but what sets U.S. Reloading Supply apart from the rest is their dedication to customer satisfaction. Check them out at usreloadingsupply.com. They carry the top name brands like Starline, Rainier, Barry's, Remington, Spear, and Hornaday. If you've got a special order like primers and powder that you don't see on their website, give them a call for a quote. I did and got a great price. Excellent customer service, fast delivery, prices that include shipping, and a promise to match or beat any retailer's price, including shipping. Call them today, 941-451-7357, or visit them today at usreloadingsupply.com and use the promo code Lutheran2017 to save 10% off your order. usreloadingsupply.com.
Time now for another Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill Silvia.
This is your Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill. Today we're going to talk about dummy rounds. Now, dummy rounds are cartridges that don't have a primer or any powder, or they might be made so that they're not actual brass or lead bullets or something, but they're used for dry fire practice. Now, you can either make them if you reload or know somebody that can hand load some dummy rounds for you, or you can buy them. I bought several different types of dummy rounds, and I'm going to give you a review of the few that I've used. All right, snap caps. They're the little red plastic bullets that have like a spring in them and like a little spring attached to the primer. They supposedly keep your firing pin from getting any damage. Okay. Never actually heard of anybody's guns getting the firing pin damage from dry fire unless they're using a rim fire cartridge, but center fire cartridges, I don't really see that happening. Never heard of it, never seen it, not in my experience at least. Now, snap caps are pretty easily identifiable. They're usually kind of a red or a dark red plastic. They're pretty durable. Like I said, easy to ID, but they're also very expensive. Last I looked, they were about $2 to $3 a piece, which is pretty expensive, especially if you want to get 20 or 30 or 40 dummy rounds to load up magazines so you can have, 3 magazines just like you would of 10 rounds if you were shooting in IDPA. Becomes a lot more expensive if you're loading up 6 or 7 magazines if you're practicing for USPSA. Now, like I said, if you hand load bullets, you can make your own. It's really cheap. They're not real durable, but they're very easy to fix. Sometimes the bullets will get a little dislodged. Sometimes they set back in from hitting feed ramps too much, because you'd have to set the crimp really hard to keep it from not dislodging the bullet from the case. And after you use them for a while, they start to kind of tarnish and get a little nasty, whereas the plastic ones don't. It's hard to make those easily identifiable too. You can try and paint them, but paint doesn't really stick to brass or jacketed or even coated bullets very well, so it's hard to distinguish the homemade ones from real live ammunition, and the last thing we want to do in dry fire is get any live ammunition anywhere near us. There's another brand that I've used. I don't know who makes them, but they were yellow plastic dummy rounds that are basically just plastic pellets carved into the exact shape of the bullet, and they were really cheap, but they were not very durable. What would happen was, after a few weeks, maybe a few months of dry fire, the rims of the cases, plastic as it was, would break off, and then they were basically just trash. You couldn't use them. Now, like I said, they were pretty cheap. I think I got like 50 of those for like $20, but if they're gonna break and I have to buy new ones every couple months, that's not very good. Last but not least, I use some from a website called stactionpro.com. They use brass or sometimes nickel-plated brass cases with no primers. They take a plastic pellet and they make it in the shape of the bullet, but it also fills the entire case and goes all the way down. You can see it all the way down to where the primer would be. It doesn't fill in the entire primer pocket, so your firing pin's not hitting the plastic, but they do fill the entire case. So they were really cheap, and the plastic was usually bright orange or really bright yellow green colors. They're very durable, because if you hand load and you have any problems with them, if the plastic starts to come out, you just go seat them back in and recrimp it, and they're good to go. They're really identifiable. The bright color makes it pretty easy. Between the nickel plating and the plastic, their durability was really great. They last. I'm still using them. I bought some 9, some 45. I think I have some 223 for some rifle practice, and I also have some 12 gauge shells that they've dummy shells that they've made, and they're all bright orange and really identifiable. One of the big advantages of the dummy rounds is when you're doing reload practice. So you go to reload and you go to put that magazine into the mag well, and if you don't have any bullet in there, sometimes the feed lips can catch on the edge of the mag well of your gun, and you don't want to damage your magazines, but you still want to be able to practice. So the dummy rounds are pretty nice. They also will add a little weight, so you'll get more of the balance feel. I shoot Glocks primarily, and a Glock with nothing in the magazine is really kind of muzzle heavy. Until you get something in the magazine, some weight to it, it balances out that way. So the dummy rounds actually help that quite a bit and give you a lot more realistic feel for your practice. So my recommendation, obviously, is the stactionpro.com dummy rounds. I just went and checked the price, and depending on caliber, they're all about $1 per round. So that's not too bad. If you buy 25 or 30 of them, that's a good investment. They're going to be pretty durable and last a good while. And if you're dry firing even once or twice a week, they're going to make your dry fire training much more realistic, much better, and help you to get better gains in your dry fire, so you'll be a better shooter. Hey, I'm Sergeant Bill, and this has been your Ballistic Minute.
Sergeant Bill Silvia is a 15-year veteran of the Dallas Police Department and masterclass competitive shooter. You can watch Sergeant Bill's shooting videos at armedlutheran.us/Sergeant Bill.
AK pattern rifles are known for their rugged reliability in all types of conditions. The best AK pattern rifles come from the desert of Arizona. Lee Armory builds AK pattern rifles using premium imported parts. Lee Armory's enhanced receivers are properly heat treated with CNC drilled trunnion and scope mount holes, Tapco triggers, polished bolt carrier and hammer, receiver rails modeled after the Saiga design to prevent bolt carrier jump, and barrels made from 4150 vanadium steel nitrided to 1200 degrees to make them harder, more durable, and more accurate. Plus, they offer a limited lifetime warranty. The AK pattern rifle is legendary for its reliability. Lee Armory takes the AK and adds a whole new level of quality and customer service. Available at Copper Custom, Classic Firearms, AIM Surplus, and Elite Ordnance, or visit leearmory.us to see the entire line of Lee premium AK rifles, optics, and accessories. Lee Armory premium AK pattern rifles, born under the Red Star, perfected in Arizona. leearmory.us.
If you carry a multi-tool or pistol magazine every day, check out RAE Gear high-quality tactical sheaths. Designed with the needs of law enforcement, military, first responders, and concealed carriers in mind, RAE Gear sheaths are made from powder-coated stainless steel, making them strong, corrosion-resistant, and lightweight. They feature a spring steel belt clip for easy deployment and removal. Your tool or magazine can be easily accessed with just one finger, and yet the integrated retention keeps your tool or magazine secure even when turned upside down. RAE Gear's tool sheaths are designed to work with a variety of Leatherman brand multi-tools, and their new line of quick deployment mag sheaths offer the same tough construction and corrosion resistance for carrying most double-stacked 9mm, 40 caliber, and 357 SIG magazines. Check out the full line of products at www.raegearusa.com and be sure to use the promo code ALR at checkout and save 10% off your order. Recognize, assess, execute. raegearusa.com.
It's time for this week's self-defense tip from Aaron Israel of Fundamental Defense.
Hey folks, this is Aaron Israel with Fundamental Defense here with your personal defense tip of the week. This week I want to talk to you about planning around the possibility of not having your cell phone with you or not having reception and needing to get in touch with your family or friends. In 2017, we pretty much never go anywhere unless we have our cell phones with us in our pocket. We almost feel naked without them, and we've come to take for granted the reality that we can pick up our phones at any given moment and have instantaneous access to our friends, family, or even emergency services if we needed it. Obviously, assuming that you have good reception, which nowadays, especially if you're anywhere close to a city, it's usually not an issue unless you're out in the backcountry or something. But what if you couldn't dial out? What if you couldn't get reception? When there's been mass tragedies, natural disasters, or even really just a whole bunch of people inside of a stadium-type atmosphere trying to text at the same time or trying to call at the same time, reception can get dicey because the network gets overloaded and the bandwidth issues cause it to crash sometimes. If you were in a worst-case scenario such as an active shooter event, the aftermath of maybe a tornado or even an earthquake or other major disaster, or just in a big crowd of people all trying to use their phones, and you need to get in touch with your family but you couldn't get through, what would you do? Well, in the military, we had a standard operating procedure we used to call setting rally points. Ever so often when we were moving either by foot or in a vehicle, we would either pre-plan or designate on the fly a spot where we knew if we were hit and chaos ensued, that's where we would link back up to get accountability, regroup, and continue the fight. I think we as civilians would do well to incorporate the idea of rally points into our personal defense strategy with our family and friends. A rally point should be something that's easily identifiable, such as a landmark or a favorite place where you like to go, or a certain address, your favorite restaurant, a flagpole in front of Six Flags, something like that. It can also be something simple like a gas station nearby your house, a friend's house that you normally go to, somewhere where you can find each other after a mass casualty type event. Imagine that your neighborhood is destroyed by a tornado and you want to know where your family's at. Well, you're not going to be able to get cell phone reception very well after something like that, so you want to have some place where you've designated and everybody knows if everything goes bad, this is where we link back up and we get accountability of each other and we move out. If you designate rally points like this with your family and friends and make sure everybody knows where they are, then if chaos does ensue or you get separated and the internet and phone service crashes and you can't mark yourself as safe on Facebook, you can still find each other. This concept is especially useful on family vacations and other similar activities where you and your family may split up to go do different activities. If you set a designated rally point for the end of the day and tack a hard time to it, such as meet at the flagpole at 5 p.m., then it's going to be easy to find everyone even if text messages aren't going through. Now, back in the day, before cell phones, this used to be a standard thing. Everybody did it. My dad would tell me, hey, you're going and doing your thing with your friends. I want you to be back at this place by this time. Nowadays, I don't think we have that conversation as much because we just assume we're going to be able to call or text somebody when we want to get a hold of them. Well, don't take that for granted. And on the same note, since you do have your device most of the time, it's smart to let people know where you are and what you're doing. When I hit the deer in my truck a few weeks back, had I not had my cell phone with me and I found myself injured as a result of that, all my wife would have known is that I was somewhere in between Fort Worth and Lubbock, because I hadn't talked to her since I left Texas Tech. In the future, I'll be letting her know where I am as I pass major cities and towns so that if I do get in a bad situation like that and maybe I can't call out, she'll know where to look for me when I don't show up at home when I'm supposed to. So take this concept of rally points and apply it to your personal defense strategy, and even if you do get in a situation where the grid goes down, you can't call out, you can't get reception, you'll still be able to find the people you love a lot easier. So don't rely on the technology to do it for you, and have a plan and use those rally points. That's your personal defense tip for the week. Thanks for tuning in.
Aaron Israel is a personal defense network contributor and owner of Fundamental Defense. You can find out more and sign up for any of Aaron's classes at fundamentaldefense.com.
So how many of you have been in this situation? You hear about a gun or you read about it, you decide you want to check it out, you go and you try it out at a gun show or at your local gun store and you decide to buy. Maybe it feels really good in your hand, the price is right, the size is perfect, but then you take it to the range and the trigger is awful. Now you've got that gun that you've invested your time and your money in, but you don't like to shoot it. So you either trade it, maybe you try to sell it and hope that you can make some of your money back, or you grin and bear it. Well, what if I told you that you can get the performance that you wanted out of the gun that you already have? Galloway Precision makes trigger conversion kits for a wide range of guns to produce smoother, lighter, better functioning triggers. Galloway Precision is your carry pistol specialist. Check out their complete collection of performance parts at gallowayprecision.com and use the promo code Lutheran2017 to save 10% off your order. Make the gun that you choose to carry better with precision parts from gallowayprecision.com.
The percentage of women who own guns is growing. American women are more knowledgeable and better equipped to defend themselves than ever before. So, why is it that every time I go to a gun shop, I feel like they're talking down to me? Like, hey little lady, let me show you what you need. It's like all they want to do is sell me a pink gun. If you're tired of feeling that too, visit Guns for Gals, a specialty firearms boutique designed to empower women with information about firearm safety and to equip them with the means to protect themselves. The owners go out of their way to find products specifically for women, and they actually listen and ask questions to help you find the right products to meet your needs. If they wouldn't own it themselves, they won't sell it. Guns for Gals is located at 2035 Central Circle, Suite 108 in McKinney, Texas. Open Monday 1 to 6 and Tuesday through Thursday 11 to 7. And on weekends, you can find them at a gun show near you. Or shop online at www.gunsforgals.com. Guns for Gals, more than just a gun shop. It's how gun shopping should be.
Up next, it's Mia's Motivations with Mia Anstine.
Hello again, everybody. I today wanted to talk to you a little bit more about a tip that Aaron Israel gave us actually last week in episode 57. If you haven't listened to that, head back and give it a listen, and then you'll understand what I'm talking about today. But he was talking about being prepared in our vehicles. And one thing that I wanted to add on to what he said, and this is from experience, is that when you prepare your vehicle and your emergency kits and such in the vehicle, be sure to test them out, learn how to use them, make sure you know what to do with those items when you need them. What happened with us is when I was a young girl, my dad taught me how to change a tire, and that is a great thing. Over the years, I've needed to change my tire, even one time when I was 8 months pregnant with my daughter. But it's a good skill to learn, and dads, please teach your daughters. They need to know how to do this. So one day, another hunting story for you. We were out hunting, my daughter and I. We were in an area where there is not cell service, a great hunting spot. But we got to our hunting location early in the morning, and as we were preparing our gear and putting it on, I noticed that the tire was leaking. It was going flat. So I looked at that, and with it being so early in the morning and chilly out, I said, let's go hunt a while, and when we come back, I'll change the tire, because guess what? I know how to do that. So we hunted the morning, came back and had a snack, and then I pulled out the lug wrench, jack, and etc., and prepared to change the tire. This is where things went awry, and it wasn't a terrible day, but the lug wrench that came with my Toyota Tacoma did not fit the lugs on the tire. It was just a single wrench, not a star, which my dad always said, get a star, you get more leverage. Well, this lug wrench didn't fit, and we were in an area where we had no cell service, not many people around because it's not fun to hunt where there's a lot of people. So we decided to limp the truck out to the end of this dusty Jeep road where we could get a couple bars signal and try to text message. And we got through, we got message to somebody, and we eventually got help. And actually, a wildlife officer helped us. She came and she says, looking at us like you don't know how to change a tire. And she gets her wrench out. Well, guess what? It didn't fit our lugs either. So eventually this day goes by and we got a star, we got the lugs off, we got the tire changed, and everything was okay. But the moral of the story is, please learn how to change a tire. As Aaron mentioned, get your gear ready in your vehicle for emergencies. And dads or moms, like I've taught my daughter how to change a tire, pass that on. Teach people how to be self-sufficient, independent, and that will help us all down the road. So I hope that helps on your day. Be safe out there. Always be prepared. See you next week. Bye.
You can read more from Mia and watch her YouTube videos at miaanstine.com.
Well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
With those words, our founding fathers changed the world. They launched an experiment in freedom, where common lawful citizens are free to speak and gather and worship as they choose. But first among those freedoms is the one freedom that makes the rest possible. For 130 years, we've worked to preserve freedom first. I'm Wayne LaPierre of the National Rifle Association.
So you have your concealed carry permit or license to carry. Now what? Now you need a good holster. Not one of those cheap neoprene prophylactic holsters you can buy in the big box stores. You need a holster custom built for the firearm you intend to carry every day. Check out cooksholsters.com. Made in the USA, Cooks holsters are available in a wide range of colors and designs for inside the waistband or outside waistband carry. They carry a lifetime warranty against defects and a 100% satisfaction guaranteed. Visit www.cooksholsters.com and use the promo code ARMEDPODCAST and take 15% off everything in the store. You put in the time and effort to legally carry a firearm for personal protection. Protect your firearm with a custom holster from cooksholsters.com.
Hey, this is Sean from the Gun Blog Variety Cast. You're listening to Armed Lutheran Radio, a proud member of the Self-Defense Radio Network.
Up next, we're clinging to God and Guns with Pastor John Bennett.
Welcome back to Armed Lutheran Radio. Time now for another edition of Clinging to God and Guns with our good friend, Pastor John Bennett. Pastor, welcome back.
Locked and loaded.
It's a gun dude's version of clinging to God and guns. Well, we've taken on Episcopals and Presbyterians and several flavors of Catholics and a couple of different brands of Lutheranism, but today is our first article written by a Quaker. This comes from the LA Quaker blog. The author, whose name I couldn't seem to find, describes himself as a Quaker and peace activist, so you can kind of figure where this is going. I know Quakers are big on the peacenik stuff. He's a teacher and an author, a certified spiritual director, whatever that means. And his wife has published a book about affordable housing, so you know where their politics are.
Yeah, before we jump right into it, if there's any doubt as to his political leanings, there is a blog post where he refers to the Republican Party as, quote, the party of angry white xenophobes who love Donald Trump and deny the existence of climate change.
Oh, boy. So this one's going to be fun. And this little gem is called, this was from February of 2013. It's called Guns and the Gospel. And he opens by talking about an upcoming gun buyback in Pasadena. He then gets to the meat of his argument. To us, he says, it seems pretty obvious that Jesus, a.k.a. the Prince of Peace, wouldn't be a big supporter of the Second Amendment, nor would he favor the arms trade, drones, and other forms of violence. Tell that to the money changers in the temple.
Yeah, well, Jesus wasn't a proponent of violence, but again, he is assigning violence to inanimate objects.
Mm-hmm. Yet not all Christians see guns as a problem or as unchristian. Christians have borne arms, served in the military, and on the police force, so what does the gospel tell us about the right to bear arms? Just prior to his entry into Jerusalem, a city Jesus knew would be hostile to his prophetic message, he surprises his disciples by telling them that they must arm themselves, in apparent contradiction to what he said in the Sermon on the Mount. Love your enemies. So this is...
Now here's a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
Is loving your enemies negated by owning an inanimate object? I've got plenty of kitchen knives. Those could be used as weapons. If I own sharp, pointy things, does that mean I'm no longer loving my neighbor?
Apparently to this guy. So we go back to the well again with Luke 22, and this is from the New Revised Standard Version. Jesus asked them, "When I sent you out without a purse, bag, or sandals, did you lack anything?" They said, "No, not a thing." He said to them, "But now the one who has a purse must take it, and likewise a bag, and the one who has no sword must sell his cloak and buy one. For I tell you, this scripture must be fulfilled in me." And he was numbered among the lawless, and indeed what is written about me is being fulfilled. And they said, "See, Lord, here are 2 swords." "It is enough," he replied. All right, so we've discussed this passage endlessly, and it's been ignored or misinterpreted many, many times by the anti-gun authors that we've talked about.
Yeah, and the last time we went over an article, we came across this goofy notion that it was the first either of us had heard about it, about, well, Jesus was just telling that to the disciples to fulfill prophecy. And since then, I've done some thinking on this. I've done a little bit of study on it, and I think I've come to a point where I'm able to make sense of that.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I had to do a lot of reading on that, too, to try to figure it out.
Do you have your Bible handy?
Oh, indeed, I do. It's not a goofy liberal one, but it's a...
Well, good. Take a look at Mark 15, verse 28.
Ooh, I was just reading Mark this week, which doesn't paint a very good picture of the disciples. They're a little hard-headed. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a minute. Okay, Mark 15,
verse 28.
Verse 28. 7. Why did it jump to 29?
Playing a little joke on you there.
What happened?
Well, that's what I wanted to bring in here.
Where's Waldo?
I'm guessing you're looking at the ESV.
I am. my Lutheran Study Bible.
Yeah, there's a handful of translations that include Mark 15, verse 28. It's included in the King James and the New King James Version, for example. Some of the more modern translations, they're based off of the Nestle-Aland Greek text. I won't go too much into depth because this might be way over the heads of half your audience, so I'll try and give like the Cliff Notes version of this.
Okay.
Mark 15, verse 28, it's included in a number of Greek manuscripts. It's in the Textus Receptus, which was put together by Irenaeus. It was the source for the King James Version. It was the source of Luther's translation from the Greek into German. This text, Matthew 15:28, it's also included in the Latin Vulgate. It's also quoted by Eusebius in the 3rd century. It's included in the majority of source texts for Mark's Gospel, but because it doesn't appear in the earliest manuscripts, the editors of Nestle-Aland omitted it from their Greek Testament text. So here's what Mark 15:28 says, and I'll include verse 27 as well. With him they also crucified 2 robbers, one on his right and the other on his left. So the scripture was fulfilled which says, and he was numbered with the transgressors. Now that is a quote from Isaiah 53 verse 12, which I'll get to in a second. But looking at Mark 15, verse 28, there's enough source manuscripts which include Mark 15:28, and whether or not it was part of Mark's original gospel, I think that's a moot point, because what it tells us by having this verse included in a lot of the ancient manuscripts is that the prophecy, and he was numbered with his transgressors, that was fulfilled in the crucifixion by Jesus being crucified among 2 thieves.
Right.
Okay, so when Jesus says that he is fulfilling prophecy, that he was to be numbered with the transgressors, it's pointing to the crucifixion.
Right.
So, but in Luke 22, then, here's how I take it. Jesus knew full well the antagonism that the gospel will be met with. It's the same antagonism that would incite an angry mob to crucify him. Jesus was warning his disciples that they would be hated by the whole world because of him. Now, this is the only solid conclusion that I can come to concerning Jesus' reference of Isaiah 53 in Luke's Gospel in Luke 22:37. He's indicating that the same violence that was directed toward him would later then be turned on his disciples. Okay? Makes sense?
Okay.
And I come to that conclusion because, first, there's nothing in Luke 22:37 to suggest anything other than that, especially when we look at parallel gospels like Matthew 24 and verse 9, and this is also part of Jesus' instructions to his disciples during Holy Week, that same context for Luke 22. Jesus says in Matthew 24 verse 9, then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake.
Right. And there was another commentary or several commentaries actually, that I was looking at that made a lot of sense about this sword thing. That not only was he saying, look, he's again foretelling what's going to happen to him with the prophecy that he's going to be delivered over to the scribes and the Pharisees, he's going to be crucified, he's going to die on the cross, he's going to be among the transgressors, he's going to die with the robbers next to him, but also that up until now, when he sent the disciples out, they didn't need anything because they were under his divine protection.
Yes.
And now he's going to die, and he's not going to be with them any longer. They're going to be going out on their own, and so the wise thing would be to be prepared, so to have a knapsack and a money bag and sandals, and a sword would be prudent, because the roads in those days were infested with robbers and assassins and wild animals, and it would only be the responsible thing to do is to be prepared for those things.
Right. Yeah, there's 2 other interpretations that I've come across with this Luke 22 verse 36, and one is that Jesus was speaking rhetorically or allegorically, but that doesn't hold any water, because if we look at the context itself, there's nothing that suggests that. and also in the rest of the Gospels, where when Jesus said something to his disciples that was either figurative or they didn't understand, there's an editorial note by the Gospel writers that tell us that.
Mm-hmm.
The more goofy interpretation that I've come across is that Jesus was referring to the quote-unquote sword of the Spirit.
Right, I saw that too.
And the reason why this is so goofy is because, first of all, if Jesus was referring to the sword of the Spirit, how is that something that you can buy by selling your cloak? If Jesus is speaking of a theoretical or allegorical sword of the Spirit in Luke 22, verse 36, then is he also speaking of some sort of allegorical sandals or knapsack or money bag?
The knapsack of the Spirit, yes.
Right.
To me, it seems like the people who come to that conclusion are so wedded to the idea of pacifism that they're willing to stretch to any... any conclusion they can come to, they'll twist themselves into any pretzel to try to get to oh no, he didn't mean really swords. We can't have Jesus saying real swords. No, he didn't actually mean that.
But just to reiterate though, what we've said in previous segments is that Jesus isn't making a requirement upon all Christians to own firearms. This was in a very specific context, spoken to a very limited audience for a very limited period of time, that this was for his disciples. So
right,
don't use this as support of saying, see, you must go out and buy a gun.
Right. He's not commanding them to buy a gun, only that they're going to. He's pointing out that they're no longer going to have his protection. They might want to be prepared for that because things are going to get difficult.
Yes.
So back to our intrepid author. In this passage, Jesus tells it, and this made my head spin. In this passage, Jesus tells his disciples to take up swords, not to defend themselves. 2 swords would hardly have sufficed against the Roman legions, but to fulfill a scriptural prophecy. The Messiah would be counted among the lawless. And what do the lawless do? They carry swords.
Here's the stupidity of this. Sorry. Let me catch my breath here. So he just told his disciples to sell their cloak and buy swords.
Right.
And now this, our intrepid author is, as you said, is saying that the lawless carry swords. Mm-hmm. So what he's arguing here is that, Jesus was essentially encouraging his disciples to sin.
Yeah. So if I understand this correctly, only lawless criminals carry swords. So Jesus tricked the disciples into buying swords so that they would be considered lawless criminals, so that he could fulfill prophecy.
For more sins to atone for on the cross. Maybe that's what it was. He was a glutton for punishment.
What kind of Messiah does this guy think he is? This is awful. And yes, 2 swords would not have been enough to defend against the Roman legions, but Jesus never commands his followers to defend themselves against persecution. Robbers and assassins on the road or wild animals are not persecutors. We go through this every single time. Persecution and self-defense are completely different things.
Right. And nowhere in the New Testament is there any suggestion whatsoever for followers of Jesus to take up arms against the government.
Right. And yes, Jesus was, like we just said, he was counted among the lawless. He was sinless. He'd broken no law, and yet he was arrested. He was tried and sentenced to death. He was crucified like a common criminal and literally crucified among the lawless with 2 other criminals on his right and his left. So yes, he was among the lawless, but not because he was with his lawless apostles who were carrying swords. This is the most blinkered interpretation I've ever read. Later, the moment of testing comes in the Garden of Gethsemane. In the dead of night, Jesus is confronted with armed opponents. Opponent appears. I just got a... It's Super Smash Brothers all of a sudden. And Peter does what comes naturally. He uses his sword in self-defense, cutting off the ear of his assailant. This is pig.
That lawless, Peter.
I know. But what does self-defense mean? Defense of self, right? I mean,
right.
Matthew 26, 50, and 51. Then they came up and laid hands not on Peter, on Jesus, and seized him. And that's when Peter drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest. Peter is defending Jesus, not himself.
Yeah, well, and I did some thinking on this. This is so often used, or I should say abused, by leftists for this ridiculous notion that Jesus was decrying the possession of weapons. So I looked at a parallel text to what Jesus says here. One of the parallel texts you could probably find it in most study Bibles is Ezekiel 35, verse 6. As I live, declares the Lord God, I will prepare you for blood, and blood shall pursue you, because you did not hate bloodshed. Therefore, blood shall pursue you. So what Jesus is saying here is that those who embrace violence will fall victim to the same. And I thought a lot about Peter's behavior in the Garden of Gethsemane.
Mm-hmm.
Peter was engaging in violence. He was attacking a servant. He wasn't going after the guards. He was going after a servant. So here's what the conclusion I've come to. And of course, I can't say that this is clearly said in the Word of God, because it's just based off of what I see, based off of what we know about human nature. Peter was reacting out of rage, not self-defense or defense of Jesus. Because rather than attacking the guards who were arresting Jesus and laying hands on Jesus, he is attacking one of the weakest of the bunch. He was attacking a servant who was just along for the ride.
All right.
So Jesus, really what he's doing is he's addressing Peter's behavior and his motives behind the behavior, not the ownership of weapons.
Mm-hmm.
So, and as I've said before, too, we've discussed, is that, Jesus was going to the cross to willingly suffer for the salvation of our souls. And so when he tells Peter to put away his sword, one, Peter was trying to prevent Jesus from being arrested and taken away.
Mm-hmm.
But two, I think this holds just as much weight, is looking at Peter's behavior. It's the irrational act of desperation and rage to be attacking a mere servant as opposed to going after the guards.
Well, and we mentioned this earlier about the way the gospel writer in Mark, the way the disciples are portrayed as, they're not the brightest bunch. They're not picking up what Jesus is putting down most of the time, and Jesus loses patience with them on a number of occasions. And remember, it was Peter who had promised to stand by him, and Jesus said, "No, you're going to deny me 3 times." And it was Peter that Jesus had to rebuke when he told them the first time that he was going to be delivered up to be crucified, and he said, "No, that's not going to be allowed to happen." And Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan! You're a hindrance."
Right.
Peter had been keen to defend Jesus and to prove his loyalty from the first time that Jesus foretells of his death and resurrection. So he strikes out to defend Jesus. Yeah. So he's not he hasn't really learned what this is all about, and he hasn't learned that he's interfering with Jesus being arrested. That's part of the plan.
Right.
And so
Jesus told him, this is what's going to happen.
Instead of praising Peter, Jesus reaches down and heals the wounded man. Then he utters the most famous condemnation of violence. Those that live by the sword perish by the sword. And we've talked about this previously. This is another one of the famous verses that anti-gunners use repeatedly. The order to put the sword back in the sheath. It's not about pacifism, like we just said. It's about Peter not having learned that this is about fulfilling prophecy and going to the cross.
Right. Well, and for individuals like this author, I believe that their political convictions clouds them from understanding that there is a clear difference between willful violence and self-defense. They just can't separate the two.
Yeah, we see that over and over again.
Yeah, even the suggestion that if you're willing to defend yourself by lethal means, that in and of itself makes you a violent individual. It's just asinine.
But Jesus demonstrated a better way, nonviolent resistance and healing. Jesus was willing to sacrifice his life rather than harm another. Well, his purpose was to be crucified. It wasn't nonviolence. It wasn't something he. Now, Quakers don't really see Jesus as the Son of God, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. They just see him as a good example to follow. So this kind of makes sense where he would get this.
Yeah.
I mean, nonviolence wasn't something that Jesus was doing as an example for everybody else.
He was doing it because he was the Son of God.
Exactly. It wasn't something for us to look to as an example when the home invader kicks in the front door.
Right. I mean, we should all strive as much as we are able to live a life of non-violence. But nowhere does Jesus say roll over and die.
Right.
The other thing, too, that's kind of odd here is that he demonstrated a better way, nonviolent resistance and healing. So whenever we're met with violence and force, our response is nonviolence and healing. That healing part is the part that's the oddest because, yes, you look in the book of Acts, there are numerous cases where the apostles did miraculous works of healing. But it was always for the specific purpose of giving glory to Christ and furthering the work of the gospel, giving them greater legitimacy as those who are carrying on the work of Christ. They just didn't willy-nilly go around, oh, hey, you're a violent guy, let me heal you. Well, you don't have something to heal you of? Well, let me cut off your ear and then I'll heal you just so I can heal you. It almost seems that's what he's suggesting here.
Hold on, Mr. Home Invader. Did you hurt your foot kicking down the door? Let me see if I've got some Bactine. Most of Jesus' disciples followed this example, and all of the apostles were persecuted and killed. None resisted violently. It's because they were the apostles, and that's what he told them to do.
Yeah.
And persecution, that's not...
Exactly. Persecution, not domestic violence.
Right. The key words are persecuted and killed. Rapists, robbers, and carjackers, and, the domestic abuser, they're not persecuting you.
They're just bad people.
Good grief. They set an example of nonviolence that has been followed by peace-loving Christians ever since, from Saint Martin, the Roman soldier who converted to Christianity and refused to bear arms, to Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King Jr., I think he means.
I believe so.
This should offend anybody who, respects the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. To quote... Dean Wormer from Animal House, fat, drunk, and stupid is no way to go through life. This will come as a shock to the L.A. Quaker, but Martin Luther King Jr. owned guns.
Yes, he did. I was just reading up on this. I had heard of this before, and I was reading up on this last night. And, there was a story of someone who went over to visit him, and he owned multiple firearms to the point that the person who came over and visited him accidentally sat on a loaded pistol. But, it's another thing, too, is Martin Luther King Jr., he actually had applied for a permit to carry in the state of Alabama.
Yes.
But he was denied because of the color of his skin.
That's right. And this should be... for a Quaker. Now, remember, Quakers were instrumental in the abolitionist movement.
Yes.
And blacks, Martin Luther King recognized that violence was not the way to advance the civil rights movement. But as Justice Thomas noted in his opinion in the Heller case, the Second Amendment was key to allowing freed slaves to protect themselves against violent racist mobs after the Civil War.
Right.
Guns protected the lives of the slaves that the Quakers fought to free.
Well, and what Dr. King Jr., one of the things that he wrote, and I believe this was back in the late 50s, the right to defend one's home and one's person when attacked has been guaranteed through the ages by common law. Mm-hmm. I don't see him saying roll over and die.
No. He never suggested that they should sit back and be lynched as an example of Christian nonviolence.
Right.
That's crazy. When Dr. King said America was the greatest purveyor of violence in the world, he was talking about the arms trade. Today, the United States sells over 70% of the armaments in the world and spends more on war than nearly all the rest of the world put together. Some of the arms we sell end up in the hands of our enemies, just as some legally purchased guns eventually end up in the hands of criminals. Many of the unpopular regimes we support with our weapons have populations that hate us for this reason. Well, to be honest, the populations hate us, and they don't really need much of an excuse. But that's another story.
There is something to be said here. you look at what our government has done under the leadership of the previous president. We've got Fast and Furious. We've got supplying arms to the quote-unquote freedom fighters in Syria, who just really turned out to be a bunch of Al-Qaeda jerks. Let's give billions of dollars to ISIS so that they can, whatever.
We pulled out of Iraq and abandoned tons of arms and materiel that ISIS then took and used.
Yep. So, I'll give him that little tiny point, but that's all I'm going to give him.
Yeah. This, at its core, though, this is the sort of Ron Paul, Barack Obama, isolationist bullcrap, lead from behind, that just trying to sell the idea that the world would love us if we step back and withdraw from the world and stay out of people's business. The truth is, Johnny Jihad is going to want to kill us no matter what.
Right.
And we're just making it easier by sitting back and waiting for him to come to us. The LA Quaker continues, most people resent the drones that fly over their homes and terrorize them, and some turn to terrorism in response. John Kerry could have written that sentence. Now, there are valid reasons to argue against the use of drone strikes, but suggesting that terrorists only turn to terrorism because of drones is just laughable. Americans own more weapons than citizens in any other wealthy nations, yet we are the least safe. That's staggeringly ignorant. It's not even close to being true. We own more weapons than citizens in any other wealthy nations, but we're the least safe.
Yeah.
I think you have some statistics on that put the lie to that suggestion, don't you?
I was looking this up because I knew it was a load of hogwash, but I wanted to find some specific numbers. There was a study done. This is from a website called the Criminal Justice Degree Hub.com. Couple things to take a look at. First, it says the U.S. as a whole is as safe as most modern industrialized nations. Okay. If you look at the homicide rates by nation, out of 218 nations, the United States falls in 108th. So we're just barely at the bottom of the top half. But here's the thing that, Great Britain, the socialist utopia that leftists like to always point to, Great Britain has a violent crime rate of 2.3 times higher than the United States. Violent crimes per 100,000 people. Great Britain, 898 annually. The United States, 387.
See, this is just the cherry picking of statistics.
Yes. They like to just focus on homicide, and homicide is a horrific thing. But when you're just looking at that one type of violent crime, it leaves out robbery, it leaves out battery, it leaves out rape. All violent crimes.
Well, and they also like to focus solely on gun crime.
Right.
Which, yes, the United States has more gun violence, quote unquote, but if you factor in all violence or all homicide, the numbers they flip-flop very quickly.
Yep. Well, and the other thing, he mentions this in the next paragraph. They always like to focus on that 30,000 deaths a year by guns, and they never like to mention that 2/3 of that is suicide.
Well, and the whole wealthy nations thing is another way of trying to make it. You narrow down the number of countries, right? And that makes us look worse when you compare us to a larger subset of the world as a whole. It's really not that the numbers don't jive. They don't look the same. But if you narrowly tailor the set of countries to compare us against, and then you narrowly tailor the set of statistics to say, okay, we're only going to look at homicide, or we're only going to look at gun violence, and we're only going to look at this small group of countries, then you can come out with a result that makes your argument.
Right.
Perhaps it's time to take seriously and update Jesus' message. Those who make a living from firearms will perish from firearms. This is literally true, he says. No, it's not literally true. I hate to be a grammar Nazi, but this is one of the definitions from Webster's dictionary of literally is without exaggeration or inaccuracy. So this claim is just ignorant. Millions of Americans legally own firearms,
Yes.
and yet they don't perish from them. Tens of thousands make a living from the manufacture and sale of firearms and parts and accessories and ammunition, and yet they don't perish from them either.
Here's what I think he's saying, though. He says those who make a living from firearms will perish from firearms. I think what he's arguing is that those, gun dealers or those who make their living in the firearm industry, I think he's actually saying that Jesus says they'll go to hell.
I didn't think Quakers believed in that stuff. I thought they left the whole interpretation of heaven and hell up to the individual. Well, then again, he may believe it.
Well, he might hate firearms enough just to believe that.
Hell is gun ownership, I guess.
But that's what he seems to be implying here, because
that could be, yeah, that's true.
In a rational sense, in the logical sense, then if this were true, this means that everyone who was in the business of purchasing firearms and selling firearms would die by firearms.
Yeah, which clearly, obviously, is not true.
Right. So, yeah, I think he's actually saying that they'll perish eternally.
The ones perishing from firearms, if we're going to use are primarily suicides and gangbangers.
Yes.
Right? For the most part. Right, and you brought up the 30,000 statistic, and he gets to it in the next sentence. 30,000 Americans die each year due to firearms, 20 times more than in other, here we go again, rich countries. Well, that's like saying 38,000 people die each year due to cars, right? I mean,
yes.
It's putting the blame on the inanimate object, as we always point out. 38 to 42,000 people a year die due to mental illness and depression that leads to suicide. But only 19,000 of those use a firearm.
Right.
11,000 more are the victims of homicides, and the majority of those are themselves criminals.
Right. I believe the statistic is roughly 8,000 out of the remaining 11,000.
Mm-hmm.
It's typically gang violence.
Yep.
So, yeah.
And you notice he again uses that whole rich countries thing where earlier he said wealthy countries. So how do we define rich? It's up to the person who's making the statistics or making the list. It's again, we're cherry picking countries so that America looks worse than it actually is.
We're just an evil rich country, and we like to see people die.
Yeah. Throw in suicides with homicides, call 17-year-old gangbangers children, and blammo, America's a horrible place, right? Our addiction to guns is literally killing us. There he goes with the literally thing again. It's time for us to follow the example and words of Jesus and heal those who are deaf and blind to these realities. Well, I prefer to think of it as an addiction to freedom. The addiction to power is the world's biggest killer, right?
Yes.
Hitler, Stalin, Muhammad, Genghis Khan, Pol Pot, Mao, Fidel Castro. Our addiction to freedom, that's what the Second Amendment's all about. That keeps us from following in the footsteps of all of those kinds of people.
Right. Yeah, you read the Founding Fathers, and the greatest purpose of the Second Amendment was to prevent the United States from falling under the same kind of tyranny that our forefathers had escaped fleeing Great Britain.
All right, final thoughts on this one?
I don't have a psychology degree, so I don't know how much I can get into the inner workings of this guy's mind. But, like I said right out of the gate, he's not coming from a theological position, and he can't come at us from a theological position, even though he pretends to, because the theology isn't there. As one of my favorite radio hosts, Dan Bongino, likes to say, he's just making it up.
Yep, that seems to be par for the course. All right. Well, that's going to do it for another episode of Clinging to God and Guns. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode. If you like what you heard, you have any questions, any feedback you'd like to share, visit the feedback page on the website, armedlutheran.us/feedback, and leave us a voice message or send us an email. We'd love to hear from you. Tune in again next week for another episode of Clinging to God and Guns right here on Armed Lutheran Radio.
John Bennett is the pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. For more information, visit stjohnswillowcreek.org.
And that's going to wrap it up for another episode of Armed Lutheran Radio. Thank you for listening. Thank you for downloading and subscribing. Thank you, if you have already or if you're considering it, for supporting the sponsors who make this show possible. Be sure to check them out. thank you to all of my contributors, Mia Anstine, Sergeant Bill Silvia, Pastor John Bennett, Aaron Israel. Thank you to this wonderful cast that I've put together that make this show possible every week. Hope you'll tune in next week for another episode. Until then, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Armed Lutheran Radio. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, and TuneIn. This podcast is made possible by Cook's Holsters and contributions from listeners like you.